I really do think that this is the way we're working is being transformed before our eyes. And so, and I often use this slide to say that I think what's happening with blended workforce models is really the biggest change to the way that we have worked since the Industrial Revolution. And if you think about how we have all worked and how lots of organizations continue to work in a 9-to-5 way with predominantly employees, COVID and then technology has really changed the way employers and employees started thinking about work, and that's been supported by digital technology, cloud, bring your own device, AI, automation, etc. So we're on we're in the very beginnings, I think, of a complete shift in the way we think about what work is. So Open Assembly and the Center for the Transformation of Work, we often get confused ourselves about what the difference is between the two organizations. But Open Assembly, as Alina says, was formed with Harvard University in 2018 with the Laboratory for Innovation Science at Harvard. They were doing a lot of research on how to use freelancers, how to use crowdsourcing, and how companies could benefit from having blended workforce models. And Open Assembly was formed as the sort of professional services arm to go and implement some of the theoretical and scientific research that Harvard were doing. I was at the Laboratory for Innovation Science, a couple of weeks back. It's an amazing, amazing facility. We're very privileged and lucky to be working with them and associated with them. So we help organizations to put in place blended workforce strategies, to help them implement talent platforms, help them set up ecosystem models. We're also developing a range of training courses. We already do physical training, and we're just developing our digital training. And then 2 years ago, we set up the Center for the Transformation of Work, the CTW. That's really the community side, the not-for-profit side of Open Assembly. And it's really about setting up a community, creating almost like a town square for anybody interested in the wonderful world of freelancing and open talent. We have calls every 2 weeks. So please have a look at transformationofwork.org, register, come and join. I think we have now 4,000 members in the community, and the calls are pretty well attended. We get sort of 50 or 60 people every Thursday, 5 p.m. UK. We're going to be increasing the scale of the Transformation Center for the Transformation of Work, the CTW, next year. So bringing on a community manager, we're going to be doing more events. We've got some quite big plans for how we're going to build and increase the scale of the CTW to achieve our objective of transforming work for 1 billion people by 2025. I wanted to start by talking about this guy, Rishad Tobaccowala. I don't know whether anybody's ever heard of Rishad Tobaccowala, but he's a really he's a brilliant author. He wrote a book called Restoring the Soul of Business, which I read, and then he also has a newsletter, a weekly newsletter, which comes out on a Sunday, which is called The Future Doesn't Fit in the Containers of the Past. He's been recognized by Business Week and Times Magazine as one of the most influential thinkers in the world. He was Chief Innovation Officer at Publicis Group for a long time. Really, really wise guy. I would advise anybody to check out his writing. And he said a few months ago now, earlier this year, he posted this door A and door B analogy, and I thought it was really interesting, so I've just copied it here. So this is all Rishad's thinking and not mine. But he basically said, imagine if you were a company starting today and you had two options. And with door A, the red door on the left, you're limited to accessing talent who can afford to live near your HQ or must work full-time. This talent only works for you. It's reliant on their entire income on you, which could make them loyal, but also potentially less likely to challenge the status quo, as they'll have limited optionality. So this door gives you really good control over your people and a return to a simpler way to manage and organize. And that's the way most large employers have worked really over the last however many decades. But with the yellow door, door B, you can access talent from anywhere in the world. They can work for you half, 3/4, or full time, giving them and you the ability for variability in employee cost, and gives them the flexibility to fit their work into their life versus fitting their life into their work, which is something we see so much more interest in now, which is great. And this door gives you the ability to hire diverse talent, attract people from everywhere in the world, while giving you flexibility on cost management. But it's quite hard. It increases complexity and requires an enhanced management style. And what he quite wisely said is businesses needing to attract white collar and knowledge workers, asking people to return to the office however many days a week versus coming together for specific things, is in effect choosing door A, and will likely leave those firms at a significant competitive disadvantage. The challenge will be finding a way through this initial messiness and complexity. That's what really we do at Open Assembly, is to help organizations find their way, navigate their way through the initial messiness and complexity to enable them to move from door B to door A. Rishad also really cleverly said, I think, and I used this in a session I was doing with Kelly Services last week, which people really seem to love. It was all about hybrid working. And, you know, if you're an employer and you're trying to work out your office strategy, should you keep the office open? Should you move to smaller locations? What should you do? And he said there are three types of work: heads down work, heads up work, and heads together work. And you should arrange your office strategy according to those three buckets. And I really liked that, so I just put that in there because I found it really useful. But, you know, heads down is where you're like writing or thinking. And of course, you don't need to be in an office to do that. You know, heads up is the sort of hybrid bit where you might have a client in town, or you might need to go and watch a presentation, or you might be better off watching something on YouTube. And the heads together stuff is the more traditional sort of agency type work, but where you're workshopping or you're selling, or, you know, you need to meet people. And of course, it's better typically to do that face to face. And I really like that categorization of work. Now, I have this belief, and we have this belief in Open Assembly, that digital platforms will continue to play an incredibly important and influential role in the way we work, in the way digital platforms, and whether it's, you know, Amazon or Airbnb or Uber or, you know, whatever, but the way digital platforms have transformed work, digital platforms are going to transform the way we work and the way we access talent. And quite often, I think businesses have digitally transformed, but they haven't transformed yet the way they access people. And we're going to see talent platforms play an increasingly important role in the way we source and access skills. I think that's, you know, I doubt many people would disagree with that. And I think we are very much at the early stages of this transformation. But it's, you know, sort of, I can't imagine a future where digital platforms don't play an incredibly important role in the way we access skills. And if I put that alongside a book that I'm reading at the moment, which I would urge anybody to have a look at, it's called Work Style. It's by Lizzie Penny and Alex Hurst, who are the guys who run Hoxby in the UK. It only came out, I think, last week. We picked up an early copy when we were at an event in London with them the other day. And I love this Work Style book. And I think for anybody who's considering freelancing, you can really see some of the background and research and benefits of a lifestyle where you're effectively putting your health and productivity and flexibility, you know, above going to work 9 to 5, 5 or 6 days a week, the old-fashioned way of doing it, and just shows all of the benefits of really having a flexible way of thinking about work. It really makes your mind, it changes the way you think about how you make a living. So please have a look at that. So we set up Open Assembly on this belief that, you know, every company should have a freelance talent platform strategy. I literally mean every company, from anyone from, you know, NASA, who are big users, to Unilever, to Zurich Insurance, to General Electric, through to the tiniest company. In fact, my brother was with us overnight last night, and he runs a tiny little coffee shop that he just opened, and he wants to have a new logo and decal on his windows. And you know, in fact, Eleanor's going to help him with 99 designs, you know, for $200 or whatever. He'll be able to get a logo very, very quickly, very easily, for skills he doesn't have in-house. And so I think whether you're a tiny little coffee shop like my brother's or the biggest company in the world, you really need to think about how you could use freelance talent platforms. And some of the data that we're seeing from industry is now underlining the fact that organizations are starting to think about how they use the gig economy and how they use talent platforms. This was from May earlier this year, where Mercer researched or carried out research with 11,000 execs. They called it the rise of the relatable organization. But I actually think it's the paragraph, the second paragraph down in the purple square there, which says gig working remains a favorite strategy for the C-suite. 6 in 10 executives expecting that gig workers will replace full-time employees at their company in the next 3 years, which, if you take a step back and think about it, that's incredible. We're really 6 in 10 executives think that gig workers will replace full-time employees at their company. And in Japan, that's 9 in 10. I found that, I live and breathe this every day, and I found that incredible. And it does depend what you mean by gig work, and we'll have a look at that in a second. The other piece of research, which I thought was really interesting, was from Kelly OCG, who you probably know, one of the largest agencies in the world. They carried out some research, and I was involved on a panel with them last Tuesday and did a keynote for them actually on their research. But the bit that I've highlighted on the left, when I put a green box around, they said, well, we asked executives to identify the top talent challenges they face. And of course, there were concerns about shortages of skills. Yet the number one barrier to companies accessing the talent they need is poor ability to hire contingent talent. So, we use the word contingent or freelance or contract or gig really to mean the same thing. Off balance sheet talent, using talents that's freelance, they can use on a fractional, part-time, temporary project basis. And so again, that's what we help organizations to do, is to actually access the right skills when they need them in a safe and secure way. Now, if we look at the gig economy as a whole, and this is taken from a report out about a month ago by staffing industry analysts. It's called the Global Gig Economy. So it's a really, the SIA do a brilliant job at looking at statistics around the gig economy. But interestingly, the entire gig economy, which is a catch-all term to describe a labor market characterized by short-term contracts, often has a very negative associations, we're probably all aware. The gig economy is huge. It grew by $1 trillion last year, which is just incredible. So it's going to continue to play a very influential role in the way we access services and the way we work. But grew by $1 trillion to $5.4 trillion. The largest part of it by far is the sort of self-employed independent contractors at $3 trillion. And you can see the statistics of some of the others. But the platform-related work there, which is both business to consumer, things like Uber and Lyft and Just Eat and Delivery and DoorDash, the B2C, but also the B2B, business to business talent platforms, is at 8% of that 5.4 trillion. So at 449 billion. So it's pretty large. However, of that 8%, that bit I've just taken out, that blue bit there and exploded here, of that 449 billion, 97% of it was Uber and Lyft and DoorDash and Deliveroo and the like. So 435 billion, and only 13.8 billion, so almost 14 billion, was business to business, B2B. So it's only 3% of the total is businesses using talent platforms for work. However, the thing that I think is interesting is that the yellow box on the right-hand side there, that the gross spend on B2B talent platforms grew at 29% last year. So, and as you can read, it's an impressive run of accelerating growth, building on top of 25% in 2020 and 20% in 2019. So compound annual growth rate of 22%, which is much larger than any category. So I think we are going to continue to see significant growth in businesses using talent platforms to access skills. So as I say, they're small but growing steadily. If you look at the public marketplaces, which are the ones where you can easily get metrics, there are only 3 of them, Upwork, Fiverr, and freelancer.com. But Upwork's gross revenue now, gross services volume is GSV, is 3.5 billion. So they're putting a lot of revenue through the platform now. They grew at 40% last year, so they're seeing significant growth. And compared to the growth of staffing firms at sort of 19%, Randstad 7%, Adecco 15%, Manpower, we're starting to see significant increased growth on a smaller base for marketplaces as opposed to staffing firms. And we will start to see staffing firms acquire marketplaces. We've already seen it, and we'll start to see more of that sort of coming together of the two industries. What I see when I think about sort of talent platforms and where we are now is it's almost like a wild west. There are so many different talent platforms there in the market, and it needs, we as an industry need to remove complexity to enable scale. And it reminds me of the outsourcing industry that I first got involved in around 2000, where outsourcing was newish, offshoring was new. There were lots and lots of different service providers doing it. There were different destinations with different contract types, with different pricing. So you needed education training, you needed benchmarking, you needed structure, you needed a process, which we as an industry enabled. It's the same with cloud computing. When cloud first came about, I remember being head of cloud sourcing at one of the consultancies I was involved in. And there were so many different cloud providers, not just the big cloud providers that we have now, the AWSs and the Googles and the Microsofts and the IBM. There were so many others, and there still are. But the industry needed education, training, cataloging, structure before it could grow. It was the same with robotic process automation in 2011. And it's the same with talent platforms today. We need to provide that education and training, which is what we are trying to do. We need to provide cataloging and a directory of platforms and a business process standardization to make it easy for enterprises to access platforms, so we can remove complexity and we can enable scale. And I think we're getting there now. We're making good progress on that. With OpenAssembly, we have a database of around 600 different talent platforms, which I know is crazy, right? And depends how you catalog them. But there are 2 new ones spinning up every week, and as quickly as some spin up, others close down. We'll see lots of mergers and acquisitions in this space. We've already seen some, but it's complex. They are structured, well, if you think every one of those 600 talent platforms operates in a different way, probably some will target the same markets, some will target different markets. Some will get paid by the freelancer, some will get paid by the job that's done. Some have teams of freelancers to deliver services. Some have just individuals, some crowdsource, some don't. Some charge 40%, some charge 4%. It's a real Wild West out there. So what we are trying to do is to categorize, compare, contrast, and have relative comparisons for enterprises so that they can make informed choices. I show this slide as an incredibly complex slide deliberately to show how complex it is. But effectively, from the enterprise perspective going down and a freelancer's perspective going up from the bottom, from an enterprise, there are lots of organizations involved in helping to educate, to influence, to research, to provide advice. Everyone from ourselves to Deloitte, to the staffing industry analyst, to Gartner. And then from within the enterprise itself, you have functions that buy freelancing services, digital marketing, business operations. The largest, by the way, is about 67% of freelance talent is bought in technology right now. And then there's about 30% is in the creative industries. And then there's it's around, I think it's 3 to 5% is the rest. So it's tech and then creative, and then the rest is where we see it being where the demand comes from within enterprises. But then within an enterprise, HR, legal, procurement, IT, security, corporate strategy all have to be involved in setting up a proper freelance talent strategy. And then if you look at all of the enabling functions that you need to have to make a freelance talent strategy work at scale in an organization, you need a vendor management system, or at least a freelancer management system. We just saw that Beeline acquired Utmost last week, and they're two of the largest VMSs. So we'll see consolidation continuing there. You need to have some form of compliance check within the enterprise to work with freelancers, and there are lots and lots of options there. You need background checking to be carried out on freelancers to ensure they are who they say they are. You need things like security, potentially a virtual desktop interface, into collaboration tools. So there are lots. And then if you think from the bottom going upwards, if you want to be a freelancer, where do you go to learn about how to be a freelancer? And there are, again, many, many organizations, many more than there are listed here. But whether it's the CTW, whether it's the Freelance Institute, whether it's Underpin, whether it's Freelancer Club, there are lots of places to go, which is great. And then going up, again, there's lots of options about promoting upskilling and training, which is so important, creating more community, co-working spaces. And then what I've called digital freelancer enablement, the type of software and services you need to be effective at freelancing, whether it's accounting or it's payments or protection and insurance and management. And then, of course, in the middle, you've got the 600 or so talent platforms that actually match supply and demand, and where you register your services to find work. So I put that there just to show how incredibly complex it is. You can see why the industry needs a bit of categorization. What we see as advisors going into organizations is this type of model, where organizations are trying to balance and to blend their use of employees on the left in blue, as well as the way they can access flexible workers. And traditionally, they do that through staffing agencies, or they hire direct independent contracts, as we saw earlier. It's the largest category within the gig economy, or they use outsourcing vendors or consulting firms. And now increasingly, they're starting to look at talent clouds. And what they're trying to do is to balance and blend all of those different sources of supply against their demand. And they will, augment some. They might replace some of their consulting with a talent cloud, or they might reduce their outsourcing spend and move to a talent cloud or a staffing agency. And trying to measure that, balance that, and get the optimum mix is tricky, but that's what organizations are ultimately trying to do. Part of the reason it's tricky is because most of those categories, most times or oftentimes, are managed by a different department within an organization. So you're not able to have like that single lens across all of your workforce to enable what I put at the top there, TCW and ROW, total cost of work, and then be able to manage your return on work, like total cost of ownership and return on investment. That's what ultimately organizations would love to be able to do. How can I flex one up and down, one down and another up to get to maximize my return on work? Another thing that we see organizations do and try and help to encourage, and this is something that is taken from a Deloitte report that I saw a couple of months ago, is for organizations to start thinking about skills and become a skills-based organization instead of just thinking about roles. We think about roles right now. We're going to hire a project manager in the infrastructure department in London. That project manager works on infrastructure for that department in London. Whereas if you hire a project manager and you understand their skills across the entire organization, then you're able to match those skills with the right demand. Then you're not just limiting them to the benefit of the infrastructure team in London. You're enabling them to spread their skills across the entire organization. But to do that, you need some way of digitally matching supply and demand internally within your organization. But organizations that think about skills instead of roles, skills-based organizations are, as you can see there, 63% more likely to achieve results, 98% more likely to retain high performers, 52% more likely to innovate. I mean, it's just incredible, the benefits of moving to a skills-based organization. And I'm sure we will see more and more organizations move from purely roles-based to increasingly skills-based. And what will help them do that is internal talent platforms, i.e. using the same technology as external talent clouds, but across their internal employees. The reason we think there's so much growth in this area, so it's 14 billion and growing at 22% compound annual growth rate, is that if you're able to access the type of freelance skills that businesses require, the business case can be incredibly compelling. You can see like the little mountains at the bottom there, but 4 days time to hire instead of 2 months. It's like 0.1% cost of hire compared to 20% for an agency model. Cost per day 30% less, productivity 40% up, and faster revenue. If you're able then to sell the freelancers that you use, if you are in an outsourcing company or a professional services company, which are two big users of freelance talent, then you can get them billable very much more quickly. So you can see why it's such a compelling and interesting thing for business executives to investigate. And similarly, you can see some of the statistics here in terms of how much faster it can be and how much cheaper it can be. That doesn't mean the individual freelancers are not, the good ones are not expensive. Of course, there's amazing quality freelancers in the market, and they concentrate typically like almost 100% of their time on getting the job done, as opposed to an employee. Some research we read recently said that an employee typically only carries out the job that they were hired to do 37% of the time, because the remainder of their time is spent with governance and meetings and things which are not directly contributing to their work. What we do is, for enterprises, is help to set up a standard operating model, a standard structure, a standard methodology. We call that the networked organization, and I'll talk about that in a second. And we split our networked organization model effectively into 3 different options. So to be a networked organization, to get the benefits of open talent within your organization, there are 3 different types of solution. The first one is to have an external talent cloud or an open talent ecosystem. And they're the ones we talked about when we track 600. So helping the organization to know when to tap into a talent platform like an Upwork or a freelancer.com or a Fiverr or a TopTal or whoever. The second is using innovation platforms like a Topcoder or a HeroX or a Wazoku to get new ideas into the organization. And the third is to have that internal talent marketplace that enables you to think about skills as opposed to roles and match supply and demand across your organization. If you have those 3, then you see significant productivity benefits, but there are not many organizations that are yet that have all 3. So yeah, the networked organization is our methodology that we've built with Harvard. We're writing a book on it at the moment, which will be published at some point next year. It keeps being put back to the right, but at some point next year we will have a book on the networked organization. It enables us to think about how to, well, first of all, we have assess, learn, and experiment. So we'll go into an organization and assess how likely they are to be successful having an open talent, freelance blended workforce model. We then learn by doing pilots and proofs of concepts. We then experiment, and we then build and scale and then transform. And that's that sort of cycle. And to be successful, you need to think about communication and organizational structure and leadership and operations and relationships. Quite often organizations, unless they take a step back and look at it as a strategic imperative, they try and do it tactically, it doesn't scale. And what we do with the networked organization methodology is to help them to enable this at scale. We're building training content for the networked organization at the moment, and we cover everything from high-level definitions of what open talent is all about and what blended workforces are all about, to the context, some of the things we talked about today in terms of industry context and macroeconomic trends and statistics, some of the trends we see within organizations in different parts of the world, what works and what doesn't work, open talent, open innovation, and internal marketplaces overview, and then case studies. And we've got some of the best people in the industry taking part in the digital training, some of the people who have been the most progressive at using open talent and open talent platforms, and then some of the real experts in the industry from our Center for the Transformation of Work community taking part in the training sessions. And then we cover a life cycle of getting started and then building up scale and then really managing growth. So there'll be a number of different training modules covering each one of those. We have the networked organization playbook. It's on our website at the moment. This was one that we did last year. We're now creating the second version of that, which is a much more practical how-to guide, which follows on from the Harvard book, and that will be up on our website, I hope very soon, in the next month or so. And so finally, just please have a look at openassembly.com and the Center for the Transformation of Work, transformationofwork.org. And please do think about joining the CTW. It's free and it can be an incredibly useful community source for data and for research and for networking with other like-minded people in this space.